How does a modern army fielding overwhelming manpower and backed by years of wartime experience arrive at a city and simply stop? That question has begun to define Pokrovsk, a city in eastern Ukraine that has transformed from a tactical objective into a psychological barrier. What unfolds there no longer resembles a conventional offensive. Russian forces move toward the city in large numbers, but momentum drains away almost immediately. Units do not maneuver decisively, they do not exploit numerical advantages, and they do not sustain pressure. Instead, they stall, freeze in place, and slowly bleed manpower and equipment. The result is a front line that appears static on maps, yet is brutally dynamic on the ground, consuming troops day by day without delivering breakthroughs. The scale of the effort directed at Pokrovsk makes the paralysis even more striking. By late 2024 and into 2025, Russian command concentrated tens of thousands of troops in this sector, supported on paper by artillery armor and air assets. Official messaging repeatedly suggested that the city was on the verge of collapse, that resistance was weakening, and that its fall would open a decisive path deeper into Donetsk region. Yet as months passed, these claims failed to translate into territorial gains. Instead, casualty figures, mounted rotations accelerated, and fresh units were rushed in to replace those rendered combat ineffective. The front line did not move in Russia's favor, even incrementally, raising uncomfortable questions about what was actually happening inside the battle space. Pokrovsk's significance lies not just in geography, but in symbolism. It sits astride supply routes and rail links that matter operationally, but it has also become a test case for whether Russia can still conduct large-scale offensive warfare against a prepared defender. Ukrainian forces have spent years fortifying approaches, shaping terrain, and integrating intelligence drones and artillery into a layered defense. What attackers encounter is not a single line to breach, but a dense, overlapping system designed to slow, expose, and exhaust them. Every attempted advance triggers observation, every movement risks immediate response, and every pause becomes an opportunity for defenders to strike. This transforms time itself into a weapon, one that steadily works against the attacker. The psychological dimension is impossible to ignore. Stories circulate rapidly among troops rotating into the sector, painting Pokrovsk as a place where units disappear, where assaults lead nowhere, and where survival feels like a matter of chance rather than planning. Even without believing in anything mystical, soldiers absorb patterns, high losses, minimal gains, relentless pressure from above and beyond the front line. Such patterns shape behavior. Hesitation replaces aggression, orders are followed mechanically, rather than with initiative, and the instinct to preserve life begins to compete openly with mission objectives. In this environment, fear is not irrational. It is reinforced daily by visible outcomes. From a broader perspective, Pokrovsk reflects a shift in the war's character. By 2025, the conflict has evolved into one where precision surveillance and attrition dominate over rapid maneuver. Cities like Pokrovsk are no longer prizes to be seized quickly. They are traps designed to absorb and degrade attacking forces. This mirrors developments seen elsewhere in Ukraine and resonates with lessons emerging from other modern conflicts where defenders equipped with drones and real-time targeting have repeatedly blunted numerically superior attackers. Pokrovsk stands out because of the sheer volume of resources committed for so little return. Strategically, the frozen front line raises alarms beyond Ukraine. Western militaries are watching closely not to mock failure, but to understand it. If massed forces struggle so profoundly against integrated defenses, what does that imply for future wars involving NATO, the United States, or other major powers? Pokrovsk is becoming a case study in how offensive doctrines collide with 21st-century defensive realities. The city holds not because of mystery, but because modern war increasingly punishes predictability and rewards preparation. And if Pokrovsk can halt such sustained pressure, what does that suggest about the viability of similar offensives elsewhere on today's battlefields? Why do so many soldiers arrive at the front line already convinced that survival is unlikely? In Pokrovsk, the answer often begins long before the first shot is fired. Recruitment pipelines feeding this sector reveal a system driven by urgency rather than preparation. Financial incentives remain the primary lure, with signing bonuses and salary promises pitched as life-changing opportunities. For many recruits, especially those from economically strained regions, the numbers appear irresistible. The expectation is clear: enlist, train, and serve behind experienced units while learning the basics of soldiering. The reality, however, unfolds very differently. Training bottlenecks have become a defining feature of Russia's manpower strategy by 2025. As losses mount across multiple fronts, the time allocated for instruction has steadily shrunk. Recruits report being moved rapidly through administrative processing and placed on transport with minimal explanation. Questions about unit assignment, equipment, or preparation often go unanswered. This silence fuels anxiety. When days pass without drills, weapons familiarization, or tactical briefings, it becomes evident that training has been sacrificed to speed. The destination matters more than readiness, and Pokrovsk is frequently that destination. The journey itself reinforces a sense of disposability. Long transfers by bus or rail bypass established training grounds, signaling that frontline deployment is imminent. By the time recruits realize they are being sent directly into combat, psychological shock has already set in. Expectations shaped by recruitment messaging collide with the stark awareness that they are unprepared for one of the war's most lethal sectors. This mismatch between promise and reality undermines trust in command, from the outset eroding cohesion before units even reach their staging areas. Upon arrival near Pokrovsk, logistical gaps become impossible to ignore. Food shortages, inconsistent ammunition supply, and the absence of visible medical infrastructure communicate a grim message: survival will depend largely on improvisation. New arrivals quickly notice that drones, not armored convoys, dominate the skies. The reliance on unmanned systems for resupply underscores deeper problems with ground logistics and signals vulnerability rather than technological confidence. For inexperienced soldiers, this environment feels less like an organized military operation and more like abandonment. Morale suffers accordingly. Units composed largely of recent recruits lack the internal leadership that seasoned formations develop over time. Without veteran non-commissioned officers to enforce discipline and provide guidance, fear spreads unchecked. Whispered accounts of previous units' losses circulate freely, filling the vacuum left by official briefings. In Pokrovsk, information travels laterally among soldiers faster than it does vertically from commanders. The result is a narrative shaped by survival instincts rather than operational objectives. This dynamic has broader implications for combat effectiveness. Rushed recruits struggle to execute complex maneuvers, coordinate with supporting fires, or adapt to sudden changes on the battlefield. Each mistake carries fatal consequences in an environment saturated with sensors and precision weapons. Losses among these units are not merely tragic, they are predictable. The cycle then repeats as replacements arrive just as unprepared, reinforcing a perception that Pokrovsk consumes manpower without distinction. By 2025, this pattern reflects a strategic gamble, trading human endurance for territorial ambition. It assumes that pressure alone will eventually break defenses even if individual units collapse along the way. Yet every rushed deployment deepens the morale crisis, making subsequent assaults less effective than the last. When soldiers arrive already disillusioned, can any amount of numerical superiority compensate for the absence of trust, preparation, and confidence? What happens to an army when belief in the mission collapses faster than manpower can be replaced? In the Pokrovsk sector, fear has matured into a structural problem. The battlefield is no longer defined solely by firepower and terrain, but by the quiet spread of refusal, orders, delayed assaults, half-hearted, and units unraveling before contact. This is not a sudden phenomenon. It is the cumulative outcome of repeated failures mounting losses and a system that treats morale as an expendable resource. By 2025, signs of psychological exhaustion are evident across Russian formations rotating through Pokrovsk. Soldiers speak less about victory and more about survival. The language of duty gives way to calculation: how long until rotation, how to avoid the most exposed positions, how to remain unseen. In such an environment, the decision not to advance can be as influential as any defensive minefield. When enough individuals hesitate simultaneously, an offensive stalls without a single defensive shot being fired. Refusal to fight manifests in subtle ways that are difficult for commanders to punish without worsening the problem. Units move slower than planned, lose cohesion under pressure, or misinterpret orders to avoid forward movement. These behaviors blur the line between incompetence and resistance, making accountability elusive. Attempts to enforce discipline through coercive measures often backfire, deepening resentment and reinforcing the perception that command views soldiers as replaceable assets rather than trained professionals. Desertion has become another indicator of systemic strain. As the war drags on, the incentive to disappear outweighs fear of punishment for many individuals, particularly those sent to Pokrovsk with little preparation. Even rumors of harsh penalties do not fully stem the flow, suggesting that perceived battlefield risk exceeds perceived consequences of disobedience. Each departure weakens unit integrity and amplifies the workload and danger for those who remain, accelerating the cycle of collapse. Morale erosion also affects command effectiveness. Officers tasked with leading repeated assaults into heavily defended zones face dwindling credibility when promised outcomes fail to materialize. Orders lose persuasive power when soldiers have witnessed similar directives end in disaster. Over time, leadership becomes reactive rather than proactive, focused on managing fear rather than executing strategy. This shift has tangible battlefield consequences, reducing flexibility and slowing response times during critical moments. The psychological weight of Pokrovsk is magnified by constant observation. Drones, sensors, and persistent surveillance create the impression of being watched at all times. Even during pauses in fighting, the sense of exposure remains. This persistent stress erodes resilience, especially among inexperienced troops. Unlike traditional combat, where danger fluctuates, Pokrovsk offers little relief. The battlefield itself feels oppressive, reinforcing narratives that the sector is uniquely unforgiving. From a strategic perspective, morale failure is not merely a human issue. It is an operational one. An army that cannot compel its units to advance decisively loses the initiative regardless of numerical strength. Western analysts view Pokrovsk as a warning sign of what sustained attrition does to large formations lacking adaptive leadership and clear objectives. The erosion of morale becomes a force multiplier for the defender, compounding physical defenses with psychological barriers. As pressure continues and replacements cycle in, the central question persists: can discipline and numbers restore momentum once belief has been lost? Or does Pokrovsk demonstrate that morale, once broken, reshapes the battlefield more decisively than any weapon system? how much of combat effectiveness is lost before an enemy is even engaged. In Pokrovsk, the environment itself has emerged as a relentless adversary. By late 2024 and throughout 2025, winter conditions intensified an already hostile battlefield, transforming routine exposure into a lethal risk. Sub-zero temperatures, strong winds, and limited shelter punish any force lacking adequate preparation and logistics. For attacking troops, especially those rushed forward with minimal equipment, survival becomes a daily struggle independent of enemy action. Cold weather warfare demands discipline and resources. Proper clothing, heated shelter, reliable supply lines, and rotation schedules are essential to prevent frostbite, hypothermia, and exhaustion. In the Pokrovsk sector, these fundamentals are inconsistently met. Soldiers often operate in open terrain or damaged urban structures, offering little protection. Prolonged exposure numbs extremities, degrades weapon handling, and slows movement. Even minor injuries become debilitating in such conditions, removing soldiers from the fight without a single shot fired. Terrain compounds these challenges. Pokrovsk's urban landscape creates a three-dimensional battle space where visibility is fragmented and cover is deceptive. Ruined buildings, narrow streets, and debris-strewn approaches favor defenders familiar with the ground. For attackers, every step risks detection. The city's outskirts funnel movement into predictable routes, simplifying targeting for defensive systems. Attempts to disperse increase exposure while concentration invites immediate response. This dilemma traps attacking units in a constant state of vulnerability. The most pervasive threat, however, comes from above. Drones have redefined visibility in Pokrovsk, turning concealment into a temporary illusion. Small, inexpensive unmanned systems provide continuous reconnaissance, identify movement, and guide precision strikes. For soldiers on the ground, the buzzing overhead becomes synonymous with danger. Unlike artillery barrages that arrive in waves, drone surveillance is persistent and creating unbroken psychological pressure. Every pause, every movement carries the risk of immediate engagement. Logistics failures magnify these effects. Limited armored transport forces, reliance on improvised resupply methods that are slow and exposed. Food, ammunition, and medical evacuation all suffer delays. The absence of reliable support undermines confidence and reduces endurance. Units tasked with advancing find themselves conserving resources rather than exploiting opportunities. Over time, the battlefield favors those who can wait and observe, not those compelled to move. From a defensive standpoint, Pokrovsk exemplifies modern area denial. Weather, terrain, and surveillance integrate into a cohesive system that degrades attackers before direct contact. Western military observers note parallels with other contemporary conflicts, where environmental factors amplify technological advantages. The defender does not need to defeat every assault outright. It is enough to make each attempt costly and exhausting. Strategically, this raises uncomfortable questions for offensive doctrines worldwide. If relatively modest defensive resources combined with environmental exploitation can neutralize massed forces, then traditional concepts of breakthrough require reassessment. Pokrovsk suggests that future battles will be decided as much by endurance and adaptation as by firepower. When winter terrain and invisible sensors work together, how can an attacker regain initiative without unacceptable losses? Why does numerical strength lose its meaning when tactics no longer match the battlefield? In the Pokrovsk sector, repeated armored assaults have revealed a widening gap between traditional offensive doctrine and modern defensive reality. Tanks and infantry fighting vehicles, once symbols of breakthrough and dominance, now struggle to survive long enough to influence outcomes. By 2025, The attrition of armored platforms around Pokrovsk has become a defining feature of the campaign, shaping both tactics and morale. Armored losses occur at multiple stages of an assault. Columns assembling near forward positions are detected early through aerial surveillance. Movement along roads and open ground exposes vehicles to precision strikes long before contact with defensive lines. Even when armor reaches urban approaches, narrow streets and rubble limit maneuverability, turning powerful platforms into predictable targets. The concentration required for combined arms assaults clashes directly with the defender's ability to observe and strike with speed and accuracy. As a result, Russian commanders face a dilemma: deploy armor and risk rapid destruction, or withhold it and send infantry forward unsupported. Both options carry severe consequences. Infantry assaults without armor rely on numbers rather than protection, leading to heavy casualties and rapid exhaustion. Conversely, armored thrusts attract immediate attention, drawing concentrated fire that eliminates vehicles in quick succession. Each failed attempt reinforces the perception that Pokrovsk cannot be taken at an acceptable cost. Equipment shortages deepen this tactical dead end. Losses accumulated over years of fighting have reduced the availability of modern platforms, forcing reliance on older vehicles or improvised solutions. Reports of non-standard transport methods underscore how far logistics have stretched. This improvisation may keep units supplied, but it does not restore combat power. Without sufficient armored support, offensive operations lose tempo and coherence, devolving into fragmented pushes rather than decisive actions. Urban warfare magnifies these shortcomings. Three-dimensional combat favors defenders who control upper stories, basements, and hidden routes. Attacking armor cannot easily clear such spaces without infantry cooperation, yet infantry cannot advance safely without armor. This interdependence becomes a liability when one element is consistently neutralized. Pokrovsk's defenders exploit this by targeting whichever component is most exposed, ensuring that combined arms never fully synchronize. For Western analysts, Pokrovsk offers sobering lessons. The battlefield demonstrates how quickly armor-heavy doctrines can falter against integrated surveillance and precision strike networks. The issue is not that tanks are obsolete, but that their employment must adapt to environments saturated with sensors and drones. Without such adaptation, armor becomes an expensive vulnerability rather than a force multiplier. Strategically, the inability to break through at Pokrovsk constrains options elsewhere. Resources committed here cannot be redeployed easily, locking forces into a costly stalemate. Each failed assault erodes confidence in command decisions and reinforces defensive resilience. The city thus serves as both a tactical obstacle and a strategic sinkhole. If armor and manpower cannot achieve progress here, what does that imply for future offensives against equally prepared defenses? What happens when a single battlefield begins to reshape strategic calculations far beyond its immediate geography? By 2025, Pokrovsk is no longer just a contested city in eastern Ukraine. It has become a symbol of structural limits in modern warfare. The failure to achieve decisive progress there sends ripples through military planning, political messaging, and alliance strategy. What was once framed as a local operational objective now carries implications for NATO, the United States, and Western defense thinking as a whole. At the strategic level, Pokrovsk highlights the diminishing returns of mass assaults against layered, technology-enabled defenses. Despite numerical superiority, repeated offensives have failed to produce meaningful gains. This reality undercuts narratives built around inevitability and momentum. When claims of imminent victory repeatedly collide with unchanged front lines, credibility erodes not only among troops, but also within domestic audiences and international partners. Information warfare loses effectiveness when battlefield outcomes do not support it. For Western militaries, Pokrovsk reinforces lessons already emerging from other theaters. The integration of drones, real-time intelligence precision fires, and resilient logistics has tilted the balance toward defenders who can absorb pressure and impose attrition. This has direct relevance for NATO planning, particularly in Eastern Europe, where deterrence depends on the ability to deny rapid advances rather than match adversaries tank for tank. Pokrovsk demonstrates that denial strategies can succeed even under sustained pressure, provided they are integrated and adaptive. The implications extend beyond Ukraine. Observers draw parallels with other 2025 flashpoints from tensions in the Middle East to strategic competition in the Indo-Pacific. The core lesson is consistent modern warfare punishes predictability and rewards systems that combine surveillance precision and endurance. Any actor relying on outdated assumptions about speed and mass risks encountering its own Pokrovsk moment, where resources are consumed without progress. Politically, the stalemate complicates negotiation dynamics. Control of territory often translates into leverage, yet Pokrovsk resists that logic. Without tangible gains, bargaining positions weaken and pressure shifts inward. Sustaining long-term operations under these conditions strains economies, manpower pools, and public support. For allies supporting Ukraine, Pokrovsk offers validation that assistance focused on defense intelligence and precision can yield disproportionate strategic effects. The city also influences future force development. Western defense circles increasingly emphasize resilience, decentralization, and counter-drone capabilities. Pokrovsk serves as a real-world laboratory, illustrating why these priorities matter. It shows that wars are not won solely by possessing advanced platforms, but by integrating them into coherent systems capable of adapting under pressure. As the conflict continues, Pokrovsk stands as a warning and a lesson. It warns that brute force alone cannot overcome prepared defenses in a transparent battle space. It teaches that morale, logistics, and adaptation matter as much as firepower. And it raises a final, unavoidable question for military planners and policymakers alike: if Pokrovsk can halt sustained pressure from a major military power. How should future wars be planned to avoid similar strategic dead ends?